Welcome back to the podcast. When you look at a study, you might look at a little more than the abstract, right? You might look at the methods to make sure that everything is on the up and up. But how often are you taking a deep dive or even a shallow dive into the authors to make sure that this is someone that can be trusted? So we're going to find out today, when we're looking at a study, how to smell the BS real fast. So on today's episode, we've got Dr. Katie Suleta, who is a trained epidemiologist with a background in infectious diseases and health informatics. She works as a regional director of research in graduate medical education, so she's talking to residents on the daily, and is a science writer. So Dr. Suleta, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get started, first, a word from our sponsor. Hey, this is Brad Block, host of The Physician's Guide to Doctoring. This is a personal and professional development podcast for physicians where we have experts on the show that try to teach us everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle. Doctors change lives every day, but what happens when life changes yours? A single injury, a sudden illness, your career, your income, your future can shift in an instant. The best physicians don't just plan for success, they protect it. At Set for Life Insurance, they believe financial security isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. True own occupation disability insurance ensures that no matter what happens, your future stays in your hands. Because protecting your income means protecting everything you've built. Visit drpodcastnetwork.co/setforlife today. Secure your future before life makes that choice for you. And we're back. Dr. Suleta, part of the reason that we're going to be talking about reviewing the authors and making sure that there are no conflicts of interest is based on a very specific interaction that you just had with the Journal of Personalized Medicine, which, by the way, the title of the journal makes me a little bit suspect. So tell us about that interaction and why we should all be furious about this.
So first off, your instincts around, I think, that title are correct. Whenever a title of a journal seems sus, it probably is. It most likely is. And we can talk a little bit more about some other examples of sus journals that usually have extremely long names, like the Journal of Health Law, Policy, and Public Health Research or something. Journal names are not that long. They shouldn't be that long. It should be suspicious if they're that long. So with this one, honestly, it's been quite the ride. I published an article on it back in August of 2024. There was this case study that was published by a few researchers from the University of Maryland. I won't put them on blast exactly who they are, but if you really want to know, that's very easy to find because I published on it over at the American Council of Science and Health. Anyway, so this article was about a case study on twin girls, and they were treated with a naturopath and hundreds of supplements. The problem with all of this is, one, it's frankly BS. And two, I find it to be unethical. But three, the main author, the lead author on the study, was on the supplement company's payroll and was even in the affiliation line of the author affiliation. It was billed as the University of Maryland and then also this company that does a whole bunch of supplement hawking. And yet I went down to the conflict of interest section, and I haven't even started reading the actual study yet, mind you. And I just go look at the conflict of interest section and there's nothing declared there. And I thought that it was very strange that there, one, wasn't anything in the conflict of interest section, but two, also that you have this double affiliation in the affiliation line and one of them is a supplement company. That's really strange, especially because you would usually put that into a conflict of interest section. You and I had talked about, usually we have disclaimers before we go and we talk to a group of physicians about the people that we work for, the people that we are engaged with in some way, shape, or form, usually professionally. That wasn't anywhere in there, which is really weird because it's right in the affiliation line. So sometimes it's really obvious and it's not even hard. You don't even have to put it into a search engine. You can just see it right there, what somebody's affiliation is. So that was how this all started back in August.
And so you noticed that, and then what did you do with that information?
Yes. So as a dog with a bone, I couldn't just let sleeping dogs lie. I emailed the journal and said, hey, I noticed all of these different things. And they gave them an itemized list of all of the conflicts of interest that seemed to be very obvious to me, and then asked them about it. This happened in August. They responded back to me in October, and they basically said that they had launched an investigation. And as of the email that they sent me, they had declared that there was no real problem with what was going on, but they would be happy to have the authors update their conflict of interest section so that we don't even see that there's a conflict of interest, because if we're stating it, then it's obviously probably fine. So I checked this article every single month because conflict of interest sections really shouldn't take that long to update. It's maybe a paragraph, which honestly should take you all of 5 whole minutes to write if we're being generous. But I checked every month and that conflict of interest section was not updated and hasn't been updated. So I've been emailing them every 2 months, which I have a little calendar reminder, like a big freak in my calendar, so that I make sure that I'm going to email them. And I've been emailing them every 2 months, basically since August. I've been emailing them, and I finally emailed them again last week. And it had all been up until now, we're working on it being brushed off. Finally, they emailed me last week to tell me that they've actually decided to retract the paper. I asked them if they had a timeline on that, and they said no, shockingly. No timeline.
But the cat's already out of the bag. And so the purpose of writing these case studies is to be able to then cite them when you are selling your supplements, right? Like you can just put a statement as if it's fact with a little footnote or header so that it looks like there's a real study behind it, and it allows you to have some more credibility when you're selling your supplements. So even if they had included the affiliate agreement, they can already include that in their supplement sales, that it does X, Y, and Z, right? The FDA hasn't said that it does, but you make your claims online. So they've already accomplished that. Why would you put so much effort into this?
Such a great question. Because 1, junk science, bullshit science, frankly, offends me. I don't like it. And 2, for them, they get to basically go back and say, our supplements have been used to cure autism, which no. But look at this very fancy sounding citation that we have on our website, right? Yeah. We got it in a journal. It was peer reviewed in a predatory journal. And hey, it's published in the scientific literature. Therefore, it can be cited as many times as they want, as anybody wants, right? And so damage has already been done. But that's not quite good enough for me. I really want this thing to be retracted because it's garbage. But also, I mean, there's this larger conversation going on in science about what do we do with predatory journals? What do we do with publish or perish? What do we do when all of these kind of external forces are pushing everybody towards okay, I just need to get this published somewhere. I don't care where. They asked me for $500 and they said that they would publish it, and boom, now it's published and I can put it on my CV and look how pretty it looks. That's a problem because now we have all of this crap science out there that is now also being used for political purposes, right? Yes. And so people like RFK Jr. can then basically come back and be like, I know the science, and here's how I know the science. My people had published in these journals that are not real journals. They don't go through peer review, and they're stacked with people from places like Children's Health Defense, right? But the public doesn't really know much about this. And so this is all happening, not necessarily behind closed doors, but if you blink, you might miss it because you have no real idea about this conversation that's going on in general. All you know is this company is saying, hey, we've actually been published in this nice, fancy sounding journal in this really important sounding topic of treating kids with autism. And that's good. We want kids to be treated because doctor didn't offer it to me, but it sounds like this might actually work for me. So why not just do that? It plays into these tropes of misinformation. If doctors don't want you to know that for the low cost of $9.99 a month or whatever it might be, you too can have this very expensive pee that will not cure anything, but will cost you extra money every month.
Sorry, you mentioned Children's Health Defense. And just for the listeners who, it sounds like a great organization, right? Who wouldn't want to defend children's health? And this is one place where branding really matters, right? Branding's important, and the left is just not nearly as good at branding as the right. So let's just say it. So what is the Children's Health Defense? Not that this is the rabbit hole that we're going down in this episode. We're going to make our way back, but you named it, and I'd just like to explain what it is.
It's such a great rabbit hole to go down now. Children's Health Defense. So they are an anti-vaxxer organization that was chaired by RFK Jr. for a very long time, like up until he announced his presidential bid in 2023. He was affiliated with them for a very long time. And their whole thing, if you go to their website, which I don't recommend doing, or if you do it in incognito mode so that they don't know that you've been there or they can't track you, their whole thing is anti-vax. They also don't like 5G. So they're very big on the cell phone towers are probably giving you cancer, that kind of stuff. Right. And they hate fluoride. So basically, with the exception of 5G, any public health measures that have actually helped people in the last, say, 100 years, they don't like. And they have their own little sections of science that they've cherry picked. And it's all studies like what I was just referencing with this case report and these supplements, right? It's all stuff like that. And so if you're just on their website, you're thinking, wow, all of this stuff sounds really bad and it's really backed up by science. Look how many publications they have on this website to quote unquote prove that what they're saying is right.
So you mentioned the 5G, and I'd love for my listeners to be able to have talking points in case someone happens to bring this stuff up, because RFK is actually pushing for banning cell phones from schools, which listen, cell phone, I could get behind that, right? But part of the reason he's saying it is because he's saying that cell phones cause cancer. And just for those who don't remember physics from their prereqs from college, there's ionizing radiation and there's non-ionizing radiation. And if it's non-ionizing radiation, it can't cause a mutation. So it doesn't matter how much you're exposed to, it can't cause a mutation and therefore can't cause cancer. And Wi-Fi and 5G and all this is non-ionizing radiation. So it's just as clear as that. Okay, but we're getting way off topic now because I want to bring back to how we inoculate yourself, because this is something I've talked about with a number of your peers who are in this misinformation or dispelling, the debunking space that you all are in, is inoculating yourself against the misinformation. And so we're going to be talking about what we need to do before we get to the methods section. So before we get to the methods, we're looking at a study. We're trying to figure out if it's legit or not. What do we look at first? And you implied where we're going with that first story, but take us down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. So it's really important to understand who the authors are and where they're affiliated with and what the journal is all about. I recently worked with Dr. Andrea Love in order to debunk something that actually came out of Children's Health Defense, like we were just talking about. And it was a quote unquote study, and it was very poorly written. I've actually gone through it in Journal Club with my residents as, okay, this was published. We're gonna talk about this because this was just published last month, so it's relevant, and had them read it. And all of them did the thing that you always want them to do as great students, which is they just immediately started dissecting the methods, which, like, I love that. That's wonderful. I'm an academic. So, like, great. I'm so glad to hear that we're all doing this. But then how many of you actually took out your cell phones and just took a look at who these authors are? There are only 2 of them. How many of you did that? And none of them did. How many of you have ever heard of this journal before? None of them had. How many of you know anything about the editors of this journal? Nobody, right? They all did the good student thing, which was they weren't using their cell phones. But also in this case, I wanted them to use their cell phones because, hey, just take a look at who these people are. What do you know about them? Are they affiliated with a university? Are they affiliated with a company? Are they affiliated with a specific think tank or some very partisan type of organization? It's important to know these things because that gives you information before you have even started reading the abstract, right? And that tells you a whole lot about where it's coming from and potentially the bias behind it, the slant, and potentially like what they might be driving at, because they might have an axe to grind. And sometimes that axe is really obvious and you don't actually have to dig that far to find it.
If you like this podcast episode, you're going to love the other shows over at the Doctor Podcast Network. For instance, Doctors Making a Difference. Be inspired by Dr. Peter Crane of Doctors Making a Difference. Discover stories of physicians who are transforming lives and communities. Celebrate the impact of medicine beyond the clinic. Listen and subscribe to be part of the movement. Okay, I'm just playing devil's advocate here because you could have people that are on the other side of the aisle from us who are like, yeah, but the same thing is happening on the other side. For instance, Black children have better health outcomes if their doctors are Black, right? And so if that study came out of a historically Black college, they could say, listen, of course they are going to say that. Now, if someone's publishing that study, I'm going to believe that. Like, to me, given what I know about how biases affect people's decision-making, like that seems consistent with something that I might end up being confirmation bias. I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but you understand what I'm saying. Like, it seems like there could be a conflict. Like they would say there's a conflict of interest here, right? And so how do we make sure that what we're doing is not along partisan lines, right? Like we're not just immediately calling out everything that RFK Jr. is saying just because he's got a history of lying all the time. But we want to make sure we're not being biased just because of their political affiliations.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. there's a lot that goes on here, but typically when I talk to my residents about this, it's a lot of, okay, is there a robust body of evidence to back up what they are trying to do and what their conclusions are? Oftentimes when something is so politically driven and partisan, the answer is no. And what you can find is they've cherry-picked stuff, but go in and see what the scientific consensus is on something. That's not partisan necessarily.
Yeah.
That's the scientific consensus, right?
Yes, no, but I'm sorry. Unfortunately, it's become partisan. One side is driven by science and the pursuit of truth, and the other side seems to be a little more carefree with what they consider the truth. It's just to push their own narrative. It's unfortunate that's where we become, but unfortunately science has become partisan, which I think we all can agree on.
Yes, but it is important to understand what a real conflict of interest is, right? Because there's actual money behind a lot of these, say, supplement studies. In the same way that people get upset about big pharma,
yeah,
I don't hear people being upset by big wellness and kind of big supplement, which they do the same stuff, but nobody seems to care. And there's real conflicts of interest there, which is they want your money. There's a real reason why they are trying to do this. And so like asking yourself, what is a real conflict of interest versus I just don't like what they're saying. Trying to be a bit more self-aware of kind of what is a real conflict of interest versus this makes me uncomfortable.
But 70% of clinical trials are industry funded. That's an inherent conflict of interest. But we shouldn't be throwing the baby out with the bathwater just because I don't want us to say that all supplement research is soiled because they have a financial conflict of interest, because then we're talking about pharmaceutical research too, which is 70% of clinical trials. So we're going to have to toss all of those out, especially since that number is going to go up because the NIH is now going to be losing a ton of its funding. So even more is going to have to be funded privately than publicly. So, what we apply to the supplement industry, we should also be applying to the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, I agree. I think the real distinction here is like asking yourself what you really know versus what you don't actually know. So pharmaceutical industry, for example, the FDA is there to act as a check on them and to make sure that they are testing their products. And most products never even make it to trial because it doesn't get through animal trials. And so there is a regulation on that. Supplement companies, real different beast, right?
Yeah.
They are what is generally considered safe, right? They're regulated not like drugs. They don't have to actually go through trials. And anytime you see somebody that has said that they have put their supplement through a trial is either lying or it was because it was funded by somebody with a very specific end goal in mind. Now, does that mean that all supplement trials are inherently biased? Not necessarily, but once you understand the guardrails that have been put in place around research in the pharmaceutical industry in particular versus the supplement industry, then it becomes a really different thing. And so asking yourself, what do you actually know about the guardrails, or what do you actually know about the supplement industry and how it's regulated or not regulated in this case? And so being a bit more humble about what you know about these topics versus what you don't, which is also why we would even start this process in the first place. What do you know about the authors of this study? What do you know about their institutions that they're affiliated with? What do you know about the background research on this at all? All of this is an act of, I guess, of intellectual humility, which is not something that we've been very good at in the past, but I think that we need to start getting really good at now.
Okay. So I know this is going to be a squirrely question to answer, but how much conflict is too much conflict, right? Or all of it is just a piece of information. What I've been telling my patients recently, I've been using this Wheel of Fortune analogy, and I'm like, every patient that walks in the door is like a game of Wheel of Fortune. And sometimes you get your 5 letters and it spells out all the words and you know the answer and there it is. And sometimes you got like an O and a Q and you've got to figure it out. So I'm guessing the answer is all of these are just a piece of information. What is this journal? What is this author? What are their conflicts? What do they tend to publish? Where are they? Where did the money come from? And so all of them are just like one singular piece of information. And it's possible with all these conflicts to create good science. It is. Yeah. It's still possible.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
You just need to have that skepticism about you.
Yes. And a critical thinking component of it cannot be overstated. It's important to really understand that, yes, good science can come out of things that are potentially laden with conflicts of interest, but also then what do you know about how that's regulated, all of those types of things. And so it is possible that you can get good science out of it, but also at the end of the day, if there's a bottom line to be impacted, especially around items that are not really regulated, it probably will be. And it's important to establish that intellectual humility. But again, I think it's basic hand hygiene of after you go to the bathroom, you always wash your hands. Before you read a study, you understand who the study is by.
Yeah.
I don't repost stuff on social medias when I don't know who the original poster is. And that sounds silly, but honestly, I don't want to share anything from somebody that is potentially out to establish something that seems like a trusting relationship with their followers and then has their axe to grind about, being an anti-vaxxer or something like that. It just has misinformation that they will try to then kind of slip in there, because that's the unfortunate reality of the information ecosystem that we find ourselves in is there are some people who are just straight up wrong about everything, conspiracy theorists, and RFK Jr. comes to mind. But there are also a lot of people that are really effective at spreading misinformation because there are nuggets of truth to the things that they say. And it's really hard to determine kind of the bullshit from like the actual good stuff because, hey, this person said that I need to get good sleep every night and that I need to eat a balanced diet. But then they also said the vaccines are bad for me, but like they said this other stuff and that other stuff is true. Therefore, it must be true the vaccines are bad for me. That's the thinking and how it goes. And I want to be really cautious about the things that I share because frankly, I don't want to be seen as endorsing people that I might have some very questionable ideas about some of this health stuff in particular.
Certainly. Yeah, I think it might have been Stephen Colbert when he was with the Colbert Report. Or maybe it was Jon Stewart, I'm not sure. Truthiness. I think it was about the war in Iraq. They were referring to truthiness, and I think that's the best word to use. So are there any other heuristics or routines we can, because listen, we're busy doctors. You're asking a lot. Oh, the fact that someone's picking up a study and reading it to begin with, kudos to you for doing that. And now we're asking them to go down these other rabbit holes of the journal and the author and all. It's a lot. So are there any other simple heuristics or routines that we can build into our reading habits? Like you said, the hand hygiene of reading, or is it just Google search the author and the journal and that should be adequate?
So no, that's not going to be adequate, unfortunately. Lateral reading is really good. So going and seeing what other people are saying about it and seeing how different areas are reacting to a study, if they are. This is mostly true for, say, news articles that you might have a very visceral reaction to. So if you see a headline that makes you really angry, before you hit share, go see if anybody else is reporting on it and how they're reporting on it. It's similar here. See if anybody else is talking about this article. See if anybody has talked about it online, or if sometimes, depending upon the journal, there might be an open comment process, and see what people are saying about it. Because I think we're all good enough to be able to see when somebody's trolling in a comment section versus, oh, I actually have some concerns about X, Y, and Z things that you didn't bring up. So I think it's a really good idea to consume information around the actual article in question, be it a news article or an actual journal article, right? Consuming information about it to see what other people have said about it. So then you can really start to bear out that truthiness component before you've even really gotten to read it. And I think, again, that's just good hygiene for information consumption in general. And again, we haven't even gotten into the methodology component of it, but I think there's also a be self-aware component of this as well, of I want this to be true. Oh, I really want this to be true versus I don't want this to be true. Being aware of your own kind of biases as you're going in, or even just your own emotions as you're walking into it. I didn't really want to read it, so I didn't really pay attention to it. It seemed fine. Okay, was it though? If you didn't pay attention, is it fine because you didn't really engage with it, or because you actually think it's fine? And so I think there's a lot of self-awareness that goes into information consumption that I think people also forget about.
So a lot of this gets back to a financial conflict of interest, right? Is like, where's all the funding coming from? Where's the money going? Who's getting paid for this? But then you have you and your colleagues who are pushing back against it. And a lot of the pushback is the ire of the people that you are undermining. Right. And they're like, you're paid for by X, Y, and Z, right? Big Pharma's paying for you or whatever. And for those physicians who are out there looking for talking points, when you're engaging with your patients, your neighbors, your colleagues, whatever, one of the things that people look for most in life is purpose, right? And Freud said that we're in constant pursuit of pleasure. And then Viktor Frankl said, no, the thing that supersedes pleasure is purpose. That's what people are really searching for. And what I've seen online is people like you devote so much time into debunking that information. There's, like you mentioned, Dr. Andrea Love. We've had Dr. Jess Steyer on the show. We've had Jonathan Stea. We've had a lot of these people who put a lot of effort with no compensation into debunking this stuff. And the question is why? And I think the answer is purpose, which is, again, in the higher order than pleasure, which is you all have found your purpose in this, and it really lights you up to be able to help people to discern fact from fiction. And so if anyone brings that up, I think that's where it comes from. What do you think?
Yes, I totally agree with you. Also, shout out to all of those people that you just name checked, because they've been great colleagues in this space and they work tirelessly on all this stuff. The purpose is, I get really offended when I see people trying to work over each other and basically just lie to them. I really hate that. I really do. I've seen it with my own family, honestly, and I don't want other people going through it. And it sucks. I think a lot of us have very similar kinds of experiences where our reaction is not just, that person sucks, maybe I'll just avoid them. Now it's become, let's go ahead and try to educate other people on how this happened and how we can maybe try to prevent this in the future, and how you can prevent this from happening to you, your loved ones, et cetera, et cetera. Also, we're in this like totally insane information space right now where apparently up is down, the sky is green, and basically the arbiters of truth are under attack at this point, right? All of a sudden, science is a very partisan issue when it really shouldn't be. And it doesn't need to be, frankly. But when you weaponize it, then we no longer have a shared reality. And that's where a lot of problems come in. It also goes beyond the, I'm mortally offended by this thing that you did because I think that you're a bad person. It also goes to the, actually, this is also just really dangerous for society, because when you scale this out, boy, does that get ugly very quickly. And people get very attached to their beliefs, right? We're talking about communities. Like, unfortunately, anti-vax is a community. That sucks for a lot of reasons, but not the least of which is that means that identity is really hard to break through, because you're essentially trying to strip people of their community. And that's scary. If you think about it, all of a sudden you woke up one morning and somebody was like, you can't be friends with all of the people that you've been friends with and that have been your support system for a while. You just can't have that anymore. That's terrifying. That kind of harkens back to our tribalism. We survive in groups. And so when you take away that group identity, that's really scary.
Yeah.
And
you die. Like previously, if
die.
you lost your tribe, you would be dead. And so strong it is. Yeah. And it's also their identity. It's their sense of self. Who are they if they're not this person? Now they have no idea, which is also a terrifying idea. Yeah. So once it becomes part of your identity, it becomes almost impossible. It's like living a cult, which never happens. Maybe we should talk to someone. I should have a cult expert next on the show. But no, I don't think, for the physician audience, we're not trying to help people leave their cults. We're just trying to provide them with good information. It's unfortunate that we can't all be in the pursuit of truth. What we're in the business of doing, what we all should be in the business of doing, even if it doesn't fit our narrative. But that's what a real scientist is, right? You've got to be able to change based on new information. And if you're not willing to do that, you're really not a scientist. But thank you for all the time you've taken to inoculate your followers and all the people that see you on social media against misinformation, and helping us to really take, because from the homework that you've given us, it'll just take a couple of minutes to do this deep dive and find out the information that's readily out there, to find out if we should really be trusting this study. And if we shouldn't, we can then very easily call it out to someone who is using it as if it's the truth. Thank you for giving this information to us, because ultimately it's going to save us a lot of time and effort, and hopefully help our patients as well. So if people want to follow you online, which is how I found you, how can they do that?
You can find me at Blue Sky. You can find me on Instagram. Unfortunately, at Facebook, I am at Dr. Katie Suleta, and that's also on Threads. So you can find me on any of those. I'm also over at the American Council on Science and Health. That's my main outlet. I do have a piece on how to read a scientific article that I've used in my journal clubs with my residents in the past. I have also published over at The Conversation, Skeptical Inquirer, Stat News, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some other ones. But if you want to find any of those, you can also find my link tree, which is linked to in my social medias.
Amazing. Thank you again for your time, for your pursuit of the truth, and for training the next generation of doctors.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. I have a favor to ask. You listened to the episode until the end, which means you either fell asleep or you really liked the episode. So please share it, or like it, or comment on a social media post, or write us a 5-star review. Something. It would really help me out. And maybe what you learned from this episode can help someone else too. The views expressed in this episode are those of the interviewer and interviewee and don't represent the views of their employer or even their significant other. Even though the magic of podcasting make it sound like I'm talking directly to you. This is not a doctor-patient relationship, and this is not medical advice or financial advice or really any advice. Thank us again for listening to The Physician's Guide to Doctoring.